Well, welcome back, everybody. Silent audience. Thank you, Carla. I appreciate it. Well, I'm not sure if anybody had a hard time, Jack. Thank you, Mandy. I'm not sure if anybody had a hard time sleeping that last night thinking about preservation. If you did, now's your time to ask any questions. I always like to leave this open for you guys to and gals to ask any kind of questions that you might have up to this, up to this point. We talked about crack sealing. We talked about slurry seals. And I want to go back to this table that I talked about on the effectiveness of slurry seals. As you can see there in green, slurry seals are really ideally used for friction loss. So as your pavement ages, oxidizes, it gets sun, whatever it may be, coming back in there in the slurry seal is the best kind of treatment you do. And that's why you'll see it a lot of times used for residential streets and things like that. It's really simple. The advancement in slurry seal now with the use of polymers in them makes it a little more extendable. Instead of going to 2 to 3 years, maybe now more to 4 to 5 years. So I think we're learning from this as we go. And again, it's just another thing for your toolbox as a treatment to use. Then we talked about microsurfacing. And again, microsurfacing is kind of the next step as you go on to that curve, that pavement condition curve. It starts going down. It's right up on the top. Microsurfacing is the next one after slurry seals to be used. And as we said yesterday, with microsurfacing, you don't need the sun for evaporation. It could be done at night, so that's sometimes a good thing for agencies, and it helps improve, fills in ruts if you got a pavement that's rutted, and again, it uses a lot of your polymer modified emulsions and high quality aggregates, so it's a little bit stronger. Again, I mentioned yesterday about typical application rates, and for a microsurfacing, it's 25 to 30 pounds. And again, this is something I can't emphasize enough because this really will make or break your project by not having enough aggregate materials down where it's um, making that surface treatment a very good usable and where you don't have to put another application over top of it. And it's a very simple check to do. You can either calibrate to the truck or take samples of the material ahead of time and weigh them and see if you're getting the right aggregate material. So just some things that can be done to verify that. We talked about the materials. I won't spend too much time on that. Typically for microsurfacing, type 2, type 3, and the main difference between the type 2 and type 3 is just the aggregate gradation. That's all it is. And type 3 more is for your highway roads. Type 2 is more your residential and roads like that. Again, here's the type 1, type 2, type 3. Any additional information? We talked about the auger box where for microsurfacing you got 2 instead of 1 because we're adding additives and admixtures and we're adding additives and things like that. So we want to make sure we keep that thing consistent. Some additional, I can't say enough about these guidelines. They're free. Feel free to go to issa.com and get this information if you feel you need it. Again, these are just guidelines, they're not specifications. And if you're looking for specifications, I'd always recommend going to your DOT if you don't have them, or reach out to me and I can share you some best practice ones out there. For the aggregate materials, again, quite straightforward, water. And water really helps these. With the emulsion already having 50% water, having this water makes it very easy and makes it for mixing, lubricating, and handling of these materials. It's almost a science. Unlike asphalt, we have to trust our contractors a little bit to putting this material down. However, we can only trust so much, whereas where we also have to recommend that we need a mix design. And that's for our point of quality assurance, that's what we need. Mineral filler, consistency, this is what's oftenly used. And chemical additives, control that break. Remember what I said about controlling break. That's that time it takes to set up. And oftentimes we can't wait forever. We got to have this set up fairly quickly. So by having a chemical additive and working with your manufacturer, contractor on that additive makes a difference. Again, some of the biggest difference of the two micro and slurries. Again, aggregate is one of the biggest things. Stiffer the mix, additives, emulsions, and etc. Here's some tests for those in the lab, for the different types of tests for both, for the emulsions. And I have to say this, stability is a big one, storage and stability is another, and residual. That's another one that we are currently working on a national study to help with residual, because that's a test that's very important for this, for properties as we go forward. And we're trying to work better and trying to find some better ways of going about doing tests for residuals. So stay tuned. And penetration. Talked about making sure you get samples if you're going to take it at the storage tank, or if you're going to take it out of the project. Make sure you do take samples. Let the contractor know that you are taking samples in case things happen to go on the bad side. Not to say they will, but it's always best to take samples. And when we take samples, always use plastic containers and make sure those containers are completely full and properly stored. Again, accreditation, making sure we get a mix design done, and also accredited laboratories. So when you're seeing a project coming out there and you want to verify and make sure that contractor is a certified lab to do these type of testing for your mix design, so they're doing it properly. And again, for the aggregate test, and etc. Can't say enough about sand equivalents. If you have a really dirty aggregate and you're trying to do a microsurfacing, you may not be able to meet your sand equivalent values. And I've had a couple states this last year call me about this, about requirements. And unfortunately, it goes back to making sure you got somewhat clean aggregate, not really dirty aggregate, or it's not going to pass your sand equivalent test. Moving on, further on the mix designs. Again, these are some of the mix designs that the contractor will do for you. Cohesion test, consistency. They're very simple tests, but again, they're very important. And here are the other kind of tests: wet track abrasion, loaded wheel, and compatibility test. And then there's the mix design reference that you'll get back from the contractor. Any questions on that? I apologize if I just kind of streamed through that, but I thought it was more of a kind of just a rehash of what we talked about yesterday. Feel free to use your chat pod. But I like to say one thing about the wet track abrasion test. As you can see here, this is a type 3. If you're going to be putting this on some kind of roadway and the wet track abrasion test comes in pretty high, as you'll see there, it took a lot of material off. It's a very good test on performance. So that's something that's kind of good to see and how that performs. All right, since there are no questions, we'll move on. Again, I want to talk about the right materials, making sure approved sources, aggregate emulsions are being used. And there's procedures that are being used to verify that they're in conformance, and testing and inspection. And we talked about microsurfacing yesterday to fill the ruts. There's a rut box. Excuse me. There's a zone project. There's some photos of a project actually being done to fill. For microsurfacing applications, it's a very thin surface material that's being applied. It can be laid down at 2 or 3 times the thickness of the largest stone, so keep that in mind. The emulsion in the system is always polymer modified and can typically be open to traffic in 1 hour. So not too shabby, right? 1 hour, that's pretty decent. And again, weather conditions, environmental conditions, humidity will all play a factor in this. So just saying 1 hour for everything, you got to be careful. Again, it could be also your emulsion. So work with your supplier on what type of time frame that you have to be used. And again, the schematic for slurry seals, it's using the evaporation. Here's kind of an overall. And then we got our microsurfacing. It's more of a chemical break. All right. Okay, we talked about the truck mounted paver used for residential areas. And if you've got roadways that are straight and windy freeways, I'll recommend a continuous pavers and making sure that your specifications mention this. So that way they're not putting one of these down, or they're not using one of these when it comes to freeways, because then you'll have issues. You'll have bumps, you'll have stops, and you don't want that. All right, I talked about calibration's key, very important. Along with that, where do you go for further information on calibration? Well, right here, this inspection manual. Speak to somebody at ISSA, they can grab you a copy. Good information, very valuable. All right, lastly, I want to talk about some performances of microsurfacing, typically 4 to 7 years. It's effective for rut filling, provides that high initial friction values, delays equipment of reflective cracking. So sometimes you may have a concrete surface that's going to reflect up through the pavement. Here, using microsurfacing will help a little bit. It's not going to get rid of it, but it's going to help a little bit just because of the material, that's the polymer and everything else that's with it. And it's effective on high volume and low volume roadways. We're used to seeing low volumes, but guess what? It is now effective on high volumes. And Alabama here a couple of years ago used it on one of their main thoroughways, and it's performing great. And up in Pennsylvania, they're using it as well. So the application, if it's used the right place, right time, you'll see success. Finally, the ready list. What do we need to do this? We need to check the aggregate moisture. We want to, especially for microsurfacing and slurry. Remember yesterday we were talking about that, making sure we get a sample of the aggregate and close the lid so we have an idea what the moisture content is, because that'll make a big difference. Do a test strip. Just don't go out willy-nilly and just do the whole project. Do a little section to make sure everything's working properly. And then one last thing is making sure you're rescreening, you're loading your aggregates before it goes into the truck. It's just a simple extra step, but without this step, you're going to eliminate this. And you might have already seen these out in your projects, but again, we want to try to eliminate these extra aggregates floating down that are larger sizes. We want to try to eliminate as best we can on that. So having that extra is crucial. And then also making sure you're taking random samples of the emulsion while it's out there in the field. And here, the one photo that we had before was at the plant. Here is where you can take it right from the distributor and get that information. So as you see the guy in the orange. Again, I wouldn't do it right at the beginning of a day. I would take it at least about a quarter of in the morning and then maybe a quarter in the afternoon just to verify and make sure. Because oftentimes the first batch is kind of lumpy or watery and you want to kind of stay away from that. All right, let's talk about my favorite subject, tack coat, if appropriate. If you got a really raveled road and it's not a bad idea to put a tack coat down. It's very inexpensive and you're going to make sure that it's going to adhere pretty well. But when they're putting a tack coat down, are they applying a tack evenly? You see in that photo? Please use your chat pod. You think they're putting evenly? Are we getting the triple overlap coverage? No, we're not. Thanks, Alex. Looks like we're getting a miss. Looks like we're taking a shower. But one thing I want to mention to you is these nozzles for this tack distributor. As you may or may not see here, here you have a number 10 and here you have a number 1. And these nozzles, when they're doing just a tack coat, they need to be a number 1, the smallest they can be. For chip seals, they use a number 3. Okay, so make sure these are changed so that way it's done properly. And then if you're doing the edge, make sure they're using the right nozzle for the edge, so where you're getting that spray that's not straight across but at an angle, and that's what this other nozzle is for. All right, moving on. Finally, we're paving. Yay, we're moving along. And yesterday I talked about that plastic white material. That's this thing right here that's being laid after it's going through the auger chambers with the tool It's laying it down. This little plastic thing is the last thing that does, and it makes it nice and smooth. Again, texture and smoothness, consistent and uniform is critical. That's what you should see out there if it's done properly. You may see this occasionally, and anybody in the chat pod, have they ever seen this on your microsurfacing job? No, no. Well, this is what will happen if you're doing a microsurfacing on a parking lot. You're going to get tread marks like this. Don't panic. Basically, what's happening is the impressions of the tire is getting into the microsurfacing. And especially when it's somewhat still fresh, you're going to see this. So it's recommended maybe 24 hours to make sure people stay off of it, because you're going to see this type of thing. And this is why microsurfacing may not be the most appropriate thing to use for a parking lot. So, and then if you come back a couple days later, you could put your foot on some of these marks and they go away. So it's not like a total disaster. This is what will happen when there's a lot of moisture in the mix. It's not something that you have to worry about. But again, this is what will happen if you put it on a parking lot, and if the parking lot has a lot of traffic on it. Again, periodic yield checks, making sure that you're getting that information. Don't feel sad to ask them, because it's simple. Just press a button. They can print that out to you. The technology's gone a long way. And when you're checking the periodic yield checks, it's a simple calculation of quality place versus the area covered. It doesn't take a rocket science to to come up with that number. And then make sure you're evaluating at least a couple times a day. The more the merrier, but again, when they have these types of equipments, it makes it real simple. And then confirm the totals at the end of the day. We had this diagram we showed yesterday is what we use for a measure of effectiveness. Now we're starting to see more things with microsurfacing. What is correcting? Poor friction, rutting, raveling, minor roughness. What is slows down? Moisture damage, raveling, rutting. Rutting being very moderate, not too excessive. Prevents delays, moisture damage, raveling, rutting, roughness, oxidation. And then the negative effects. It could be a stripping issue. If you've got aggregates down below that have an issue with stripping, by putting this microsurfacing over top of it, could be a problem where then it's just going to lock in that moisture, and it could be a problem. But all in all, microsurfacing is not a bad treatment to apply. So how can microsurfacing be used to correct rutting? We kind of talked about this already, by using a rut filling box to fill those ruts, because it can be placed in the thicker layers. And oftentimes, a second application is applied if you got a thicker rut to go in those. Again, feasibility. It's possible what microsurfacing can correct: friction loss, raveling. However, I use a lot the effectiveness of this, where friction loss, perfect for microsurfacing, as well as raveling. We're talking about rutting, again, being minor, linear cracking and others, but you're seeing a lot more green, and that's what we want to see as we're going down that curve of our pavement condition. Any questions on microsurfacing? Feel free to ask. And again, with microsurfacing, you're going to have a little bit of dust in that, so don't panic, because we're going to jump into chip seals, and chip seals really is kind of more of a one sizes aggregate more than a micro and a slurry, where it's a little bit of a combination. We talked about type 1, type 2, type 3. For chip seals, there's a specific gradation, a maximum aggregate size that's often used. All right, no questions. We're gonna have to liven you guys up this morning. All right, the next topic I want to talk about is chip seals. Chip seals, as you go across the country, are often called sometimes differently. Here, oftentimes it's called seal coat, so keep that in mind. The purpose is to retard the reflection cracking of HMA overlays. Basically, you have a concrete surface, you're putting an asphalt surface on top of it. Oftentimes you'll see somebody put a chip seal over top of it. It seals that pavement, again, 1/4 of an inch, because we don't want moisture to get down in there. We want to improve that surface friction, enrich the weathered surfaces, and reduce graveling. One other thing I want to mention before I move on is chip seal is the #1 pavement preservation treatment that is used throughout the country. Due to its ability to be put down, placement, and etc. It's simple, it doesn't take much effort, and it does a very good job. And it can be done on low volumes to high volumes. That makes no difference. But again, the biggest difference is making sure the quality control and quality assurance is being done for the project. The type of chip seals, look at all these different ones. You can have a conventional single, you can have double or triple, and oftentimes you'll see triple chip seals if you're going up a truck ramp or something like that. If it's going up a hill, you can put a triple chip seal in and it does very well. Rubberized asphalt chip seals using asphalt tires, could be not asphalt tires, using rubber tires. Sand seals, oftentimes you'll see this being done with sand down in Texas and New Mexico and some other places. Sandwich seals. Cape seals is a combination treatment, and we'll talk a little bit about that, where they're actually using a micro or slurry, and then they're coming up and putting a chip seal over top of it, and then scrub seals. And I'll show you a little video what scrub seal is. Basically, if you have a section of roadway that just has a lot of cracks, like I mentioned yesterday, you want to go out and seal those or route those. You want to come in and do another surface treatment, and scrub seals is the way, is how to go about doing that. Advantages with chip seals: improve skid resistance. And we're seeing this as a common theme, as I'm not sure if you guys are noticing. And again, that's safety. So that's why we're using these. Cost-effective treatments, it doesn't cost a whole heck of a lot, good durability, and ease of construction. But the one thing I also want to say with the advantages, we got to make sure our aggregate is clean. The #1 problem with chip seals is we have dirty aggregate. With dirty aggregate, it's not going to work, folks. It's gonna create that ability where that emulsion's gonna not really get that ability to stick to it, and that's what's gonna happen. The chips are gonna come out, and a lot of other things. So we really got to do our effort to make sure, and that's the #1 reason why chip seals fail, is because of dirty aggregate. So keep that in mind. Any thoughts on fiber mat chip seals? It's a possibility, but again, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. And again, I would try it out and see. Oftentimes, your contractors are not familiar with it, so again, that's going to that comfort level to where the contractors feel, that they can do it or not. So it's something you got to try and see how it works. But I have nothing against using fiber mat chips. Disadvantages: cure time. Oftentimes they say for chip seals, there's a little bit longer cure time, but again, not really. If you're working with your contractor to make sure you're putting that right emulsion down for when it breaks and sets, that'll take care of that issue. Loose chips, this used to be a big issue, but now we're putting a fog seal over top of where we're covering up those chips, so that's not a problem anymore. Noise considerations, again, by putting a fog seal, it's going to help with that, and weather considerations. Again, like most of these treatments, you don't want to go start putting this stuff down right in the late fall or winter's coming around. That's something you want to stay away from, because if not, it's going to not perform well, and you're going to be back there the next year. Project preparation, like all these preservation treatments, preparing that surface is critical. The areas of pavement existing structural failures, potholes, deteriorated patches, you need to address those prior. And oftentimes, if you got a patch in there, you definitely want to make sure you're putting your tack coat material over that patch so you're going to get a good bond. And then avoid using cold mix for patching prior to applying a chip seal, because cold mix, again, it's not something it's a temporary fix. It's not a permanent fix. So that's something for consideration. Moving on, milling the surface. Is there any extensive loose portions of aggregate or asphalt, or if there's any bleeding? That all needs to be taken care of, because with chip seals, it's going to be an issue. You can go around it by then applying maybe a less amount of emulsion, but it's going to be an issue. But you know, there's some things you can go ways you can correct that. Crack sealing and filling cracks at least 3 months in advance. Oftentimes we don't do diligence on this, and the reason for this, we got to allow time for that material that we're using to fill those cracks to be oxidized, to get rid of some of that moisture. And that's why it's really recommended at least 3 months. There's certain states and other agencies that actually do it the year before. And then when it comes time for construction, maybe a month or two, come and fill those other cracks that they didn't get. So that way they're letting that material oxidize enough. So that way it's not going to keep that moisture into that surface as they're putting in chip seal or whatever preservation treatment over top of it. Patching any deteriorating areas or dig outs, try to do that in advance. Try not to do that, you know, at the same week or when that's going to be done. Again, we want to try to get a little oxidation and try to get some of that moisture out of there as much as possible. Leveling course may be used, and what we mean by a leveling course, just something to fill up those if there's some ruts or if you're trying to do cross slopes, this leveling course will take care of that. Remove raised pavement markers. Yes, with these type of preservation treatments, you may get by spraying over top of them, but again, they're not that much expensive. Take them out and get rid of them, and then put them back in when it's time. And also thing I want to recommend is that also look at the type of markings that you're using. If you're using a thermal line or some of these other ones that are out there, make sure you understand the warranty on these raised pavement markers, because they might ask you that the pavement surface itself must be at least 2 or 3 months out there before you apply them. So that may change what you use for markings for your preservation treatment. So consider that. In addition, place temporary markers for lane delineations until the road is restriped. It doesn't take much, and they're very simple to put in. Takes care of the process. Further, on surface preparation, must be clean, dry, and free of any loose materials. Use sweepers, whatever is out there, vacuums to take care of it. We talked about the patched areas. We want to make sure if there's a lot of porous areas in those patches, and like I said, make sure it's tacked prior. Again, it's going to give that better adhesion. And then never chip a location that does not have both a minimum ambient and pavement temperature, because it's going to fail on you, and we don't want failures. One thing about chip seals, it's really recommended that a pneumatic tire roller be used. And the reason why, with those tires, it really kind of needs that aggregate into the emulsion. And that's really what we're trying to do. Static steel roller, not a good idea. A pneumatic roller is the best way of going about doing that. Again, here's a picture of what I mean about putting a fog seal over a chip seal. As you can see on the picture on the right, look how visible that is on safety on the traffic stripes. Really nice. And again, it's going to embed those aggregates, because that's the #1 problem. And if it's used for any kind of park or recreation areas, your bicycle riders, motorcycles will complain it's too rough, but with fog seal, it helps with that. All right, measure of effectiveness. We talked about what it corrects. We're getting a little bit more there. Slows down, raveling, cracking, moisture damage, prevents raveling, rutting, roughness, moisture damage. And then now we're getting into some of the negative effects on roughness. And again, that's really because of that aggregate. But I think with putting a fog seal over top of it, I think we're getting rid of that roughness. So there may not be a negative anymore. So keep that in mind. Any questions on that? Feasibility. What could be used? Raveling. Again, what used to be raveling for the other ones, we're kind of in the middle. But now with chip seals, it takes care of raveling. Linear block cracking, it takes care of, and friction loss. Still shoving is not appropriate, because that's more of a material related issue. And as you're seeing, it helps with some of the other things. Rutting a little bit, still not enough, but there's other things that could be used. So, and then here's the effectiveness. All in green is what's effective. fatigue, linear block, raveling, friction loss, and moisture damage. Performance of chip seals. And again, we're going back to this because this, again, like I mentioned yesterday, this is really where we need to spend our time in, both agencies as well as contractors, understanding the performance of these preservation treatments. Typically 4 to 7. However, if we're going to use a polymer and we're going to use a rubber, this could be a little bit more. Multiple chips can be increased the life. So again, if you're coming in there and when you're using a chip seal and doing a double chip seal, the first application is a little bigger aggregate, and then the next application is a little thinner or a little smaller. So what that smaller aggregate will do, it'll get into those crevices where those large stones are, will help with that. So again, multiple chips can help with that service life and also can help with performance. As we're seeing down in NCAD in the studies down that have been done down there, they've been performing very, very well. All right, any other questions on chip seals? Going once, going twice? I know some of you may have used it, some of you may have not, but again, it's really very valuable and can be used, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. All right, who's familiar with what a scrub seal is? Please use your chat pod and say yes or no. Nope. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Mandy. No. Thank you, James. Now we're going to talk a little bit about scrub seals, and this has been a technology that's been around for a while. Thanks, James. It's been around for a while. Mississippi is the one that developed it about 15, 20 years ago. And the purpose was for mass crack treatment to slow down that severity, eliminate crack sealing, stop raveling, provide surface friction. Similar to what we've heard before. The materials that can be used, emulsified asphalt with polymers, chrome rubber, or rejuvenating oils, fine aggregate, and seal coat aggregate. Scrub seals, crack filling, sealing, and rejuvenating seal is a series of steps. And I'm going to show a little video that will talk about that. And then comes along the chip seal over top of it. Emulsified asphalt is sprayed and swept into those cracks with a broom. And where we're really kind of feeding up those cracks with that small aggregate to really indent into those to help it. And then it's given an emulsion that goes over top of it. Chip spreader applies that layer of fine aggregate, and then it's broomed in the surface, followed by a standard chip seal. It's designed, again, like all these preservation treatments, it's designed for a structurally sound pavement with very minor to moderate surface defects. And we're all experts on that now, as we talked about yesterday. And it have been used for city streets and highways. Again, this is not just something that's been used for the nearest grocery store parking lot. It's actually been used and has been proven. All right, let's show a little video. Got a good triple overlap. There's the brooms, the brushes, brushing that in through those cracks. About every project, you want to clean those brooms. You want to dip them in buckets and let them clean so the next time they're ready to go. Look how it seals those cracks. Very good, very uniform. Now comes the application of the chip seals. Here comes the rollers, and like you've seen there, those are the pneumatic tire rollers. So again, that's the best practice. Any questions on that? Very effective. When we talk about the materials, it's primary cationic mixing grade materials, and I keep coming back to cationic because oftentimes the charge of your aggregates throughout most of the country is cationic. Is normally the charge. So that's why we always see in a lot of our literature, it's not very common that we see anionic mixing grades. So Want to mention that. Again, with or without rejuvenators, it can be with or without, or polymer modifieds, formulated to allow that scrubbing action without any breaking prematurely. Here's a kind of a show and tell I like to show here in Utah, where on the left-hand side, they used a scrub seal. On the right-hand side, they just went in and sealed those cracks. Can you see a difference? The cracks are very excessive. And can you imagine the time it would take to go in there and seal all those cracks? It would just be very timely and not appropriate. And coming in there with that scrub seal is the way to go. So that's a technology that's going to be advancing here. I'd say in the next 3 or 4 years or sooner, you're going to see a lot more people using these because a lot of our pavements are in pretty bad shape. Again, measure of effectiveness. It corrects poor friction, slows and reduces the severity of moisture, raveling, roughness, prevents moisture, raveling, rutting, and roughness. And then lastly, the negative effects. And we saw most of the other ones, it's that stripping could be an issue. But if you don't have in areas where you're having aggregate that has a problem with stripping, you're okay. Question for you all is, how can scrub seals be used to reduce the severity of raveling? Anybody would like to answer that? Stephanie Newman here today. Stephanie, can you answer this? Don't mean to pick on you. Maybe Stephanie moved aside. How about Chad Robinson? Chad, are you in? Thank you, James. Seals the cracks and then chip seal confines and compresses X exactly by holding that aggregate in place. And that's really that's what we want. Okay, we've seen this before, feasibility, what is acceptable, and all the things in light blue can be done. And we're getting a lot of more now with light blue. And then lastly, the effectiveness, moisture damage, raveling, linear fatigue. Scrub seal performance. We talked about this, estimated life 4 to 6 years. It could be longer, type of material that you're using, but these are just typical average ranges. All right, we talked about those surface treatments. There also are some newer pavement preservation treatments out there, the ultra-thin bonded wearing course and the fiber reinforced microsurfacing. I'd be more than willing to come back again and give you guys some presentations on this another day, but ultra-thin bonding wearing courses used to be a patented proprietary product. There are now no longer patented proprietary, and we're seeing a lot of agencies use this, and it's a very durable. It could be 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches thick. It could be very, very helpful for a pavement surface for long lasting. It has a little bit more cost, but it's very proven to be very effective. All right, we're going to jump into plant mix treatments. And now we're going to go into what we call these thin asphalt overlays. The purpose is to restore that rideability, improve that surface friction, and reduce that hydroplaning or tire splash. This might be the only preservation treatment you use in your toolbox. If you got an agency, you got contractors, you got the public that just don't really like microsurfacing. You haven't done a very good job of educating them. And this may be the only type of use. And I was mentioning to a gentleman yesterday for a parking lot at the end that oftentimes for parking lots, just for the amount of traffic, the tire burns and everything else, you're best to just go in there and do some kind of mill and overlay. And do thin asphalt overlay. That's the best way of taking care of it. That way you're not worrying about it. Oftentimes these are about 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a half. Um, you can have gradations using a dense graded, porous friction, warm mix, stone matrix asphalt, or an ultra thin bonding wearing courses for any one of these. Here, basically, another good reason why a lot of people like this is not uncommon for contractors. They're used to this. The only thing is they're putting a little less amount of material down than they're used to. But other than that, everything's about the same. One thing I wanted to mention in my definition of thin overlays is a little different than what NAPA, National Asphalt Pavement Association, came up with on a document called thin lays. And when they reference thin lays, they're really looking at pavement surfaces thicknesses that are 5/8 to 1 inch. They're not doing that thin overlays as I've been mentioning that go to an inch and a half. So keep that in mind. There is a little bit of differences of terminology. This could be done with or without milling, depending upon what your surface conditions are. If they're bad, you're probably not going to want it. You want to take care of those sections by milling or sealing those cracks, depending upon the extent and severity of those cracks. And then look at the applicable for pavements in good condition. Why choose thin asphalt overlays? Preserves the pavement good roads to 7 to 12 years. You're going to get a little bit longer, but you're also going to pay a little bit more. And then most of these other preservation treatments that we have talked about, they're about a third of the cost. They correct a minor slope and grade deficiencies, provide a straight plane for plowing, and that's key. And a lot of times, but again, as I mentioned yesterday, by putting a fog seal in on chip seals and some of the other stuff helps with that. But again, it's what they're used to. Short downtime for roadway construction can be completed. And it's not much different than some of the other treatments for preservation treatments. You just got to work with the manufacturer and what you want, how long you can keep those roads closed, and then the visually appealing quality roadway for the public. And I'm sure you all can agree with you. All agree with me that having a brand new thin asphalt, everybody will be happy, right? Something they're used to, and it's just the way of going. And then lastly, it can be 100% recyclable. It can be used again by using wrap or other products. Measure the effectiveness, what it corrects. It corrects quite a bit, a few things. It slows down cracking, moisture damage, prevents delays, cracking, raveling, roughness. You see on negative effects, none, because you're coming in there and you're, especially if you're milling, you're getting rid of that excess aggregate. So you won't have any kind of negative effect. So that's a positive. But again, you're